Let's back up just a little bit then to try to maybe refresh our memories, meaning my memory, to section 3. And then we'll try and go through some of this quickly. Where he writes, this one thing must be held firmly in our mind. That since we are a creation of the good God and are welded together by him, as he manages smaller and greater things concerning us, neither can we undergo anything that is not God's will, nor do we truly suffer anything that is hurtful, unless it can be understood to bring us something better. For deaths are from God. Truly not every death is evil, except if one speaks of the death of the sinner, since his departure from here is the beginning of punishments in hell. Now just, try and wrap your mind around that as the discussion was going on earlier, from a modern perspective. Okay? Thoroughly modern perspective. Neither can we undergo anything that is not God's will, nor do we truly suffer anything that is hurtful, unless it can be understood to bring us something better. What's the author saying there?
Could you repeat that?
What's the author saying there?
No, I meant the things that were.
God will put people through things that he doesn't intend them to learn from. Or if he puts you through something that's bad, or that seems bad, it's because he wants to teach you something.
Yeah, pretty much it. It's the idea that everything that occurs, Boethius, later writer than Basil, Boethius says occurs for a reason. We may not know the reason at the time. Does this therefore mean that it would be a good idea? Somebody has just suffered a horrendous catastrophe, and one member of the family is alive and everybody else has died in a horrible car wreck or something, that you go to the hospital bed where the one person is alive and say, be of good cheer. God arranged all this for your benefit. Why not?
That's profoundly insensitive.
Profoundly insensitive. That's cold.
Yeah.
That's cruel. Okay. Does it, according to St. Basil, does it make it less true? No. But truth and tact are two different things. Very much so. Okay. Listen how he goes on. The evils in hell do not have God as their cause. We cause them. For the beginning and root of sin is in us, in our self-determination. Now keep in mind, the whole thesis of this homily is God's not the cause of evil. But just because he says God isn't the cause of evil doesn't mean he doesn't say God doesn't allow evil to happen. Because what's the second part of the point that God's not the cause of evil? Humanity is. But couldn't he have created humanity in such a way that it didn't do evil?
Sure.
What would humanity be then?
Not humanity.
And autonomy.
Or,
And what else?
They wouldn't have free will.
Wouldn't have free will. If they had no free will, what would they not be? Not in the image of God. So, to make something in the image of God means they have to have free will. They wouldn't be humanity otherwise. Okay? For it was possible for those abstaining from evil to suffer nothing terrible. But as for those enticed through pleasure into sin, to state the matter properly, do they not themselves become the cause of their sufferings? Take somebody who's an alcoholic. why do they become alcoholic? Is it because their genes suddenly, and then they take another drink, and then another drink, and then another drink, and then another drink, or an addict of any kind? It's because they start, first of all, one step down the road, and then 2 steps, and then 3 steps. Okay? That's what he means, that they are the cause of their own sufferings. Okay? So you could take from that and go anywhere. You know, I heard a an example the other day, or saw a clip or something on the internet, gun control debate. And the person made the comment, you know, that the government says, you know, guns are evil, guns kill people, blah, 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 as if a piece of lead is responsible for the death of somebody. That's like saying the fork made me fat. It's just a piece of silverware. It's my use of the fork that made me fat. It's my use of the lead that made somebody dead. Moreover, what our senses perceive as evil is one thing, while what is evil in its own nature is another. What does he mean by that? We might take getting a ticket as being evil. You're late for work, you're late for class, you're zipping along Highway 96 at 96 miles an hour, you know, 40 mile an hour zone. And, you know, one of Murfreesboro's finest, hopefully not the one who got busted for cocaine trafficking, you know, stops you and writes you a ticket.
Actually, hopefully it is that guy, because then maybe he can take it dismissed.
You get a ticket, okay? Some might consider that an evil. Notice, some might consider that an evil. It's not inherently an evil. Some might consider, you know, a poor grade on a paper an evil. It might not be inherently evil. Getting sick, some might consider an evil. Okay? But it's not. Because what can happen as a result of the ticket? What can happen as a result of the bad grade? What can happen as a result of the illness?
Bad grade, you work harder, you get a ticket, you drive slower.
Or you get the ticket and you don't get in the wreck. Okay? So he's not saying that evil is merely an eye of the beholder kind of thing. Because he is saying, no, there is real inherent evil. You know, the conversation earlier about, you know, Stalin and a variety of individuals. Yeah, Robert made a comment about Hitler. Hitler was good with children. Hitler was a fantastic painter. If only the idiots at the art academy in, what was it, Vienna, had accepted him. He probably wouldn't gone off on his murderous rage, okay? 6 million people, you know, at least be alive. 20 million people, if you count all of World War II, would still be alive, etc., or would have been alive during that period, etc. So, what's absolute evil? Even Satan isn't absolute evil. In terms of if Satan, you know, if you think Satan has an existence, that existence in and of itself is good.
Yeah. And as Lewis says, you know, there are lots of good things about Satan. He's intelligent, you know, he's
Crafty.
motivated.
Motivation's good. He has ambition. Ambition can go a little far. Want to be more than God, you know.
Inherently, it's a good thing.
Okay.
You know?
So, what is evil by nature has been produced by us. So what's evil by nature? Injustice, licentiousness, folly, cowardice, envy, murder, poisoning, laziness, passions akin to these. Notice what is not evil by nature. Anything made by God. wanting to be more than God. That is evil by nature. That kind of pride. These things, he says, defile the soul that has come into being according to the image of the Creator. That is, the soul has come into being, has taken a body in the image of the Creator, okay, and has caused a shadow to pass over the soul's own beauty. On the contrary, we call what is toilsome and painful to our sense perception evil. What's hard, what we don't like to do, and usually what is really good for us to do, is evil. Bodily illness we call evil. Blows to the body. And I think he means they're, one, literal blows, being beaten as being evil. And lack of necessities, food, water, shelter, clothing, and disgrace. Financial setbacks, loss of property. Each of these is brought to us by the wise and good master for our advantage. Okay, so how are bodily illness brought to us for our advantage? What's it teach?
Appreciation for health.
Appreciation for health. It also teaches the body isn't everything. Okay, what else? Blows to the body. Good health, strength, teaches appreciation for lack of necessities, makes you appreciate even more, for us in the United States, water. I mean, think what this single bottle of water would mean to probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in Africa right now who have no access to simple, clean water. Okay? Disgrace. How can disgrace be good for someone? I have a name for you. You may not be familiar with it. Some of you might be. Chuck Colson. Chuck Colson was one of the guys involved in the cover-up of the Watergate break-in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
He was Nixon's hatchet man.
That guy.
Got sent to prison for, I don't mean like San Quentin. I mean, got sent to where all the guys who get involved with government corruption get sent to. It's pretty much like Club Med, but it's in Pennsylvania. Okay? Got sent to prison and, quote unquote, had a conversion experience. Turned his life around and founded a group called Prison Ministries. That from prison to his death a year or two ago, he was CEO of Prison Ministries, as well as, doing motivational talks and things like that around the country. Prison Ministries was all about reaching out to prisoners and not the Club Med white-collar prisoners. Okay. Prison Ministries was geared primarily towards the lifers, okay, to helping them turn their lives around, not to help them get parole, not to help them get released, but to help them, quote-unquote, get religion, okay? But that only came about as a result of disgrace, of losing everything, okay? Financial setbacks? Nobody likes financial setbacks, okay? But they can be good, because what do? Financial setbacks tells you, my bank account isn't everything. My bank account doesn't define, contra what the 20th century American social system says, it does not define who I am. It does not define whether or not I am a success. Okay? Bill Gates is not the most successful man in the world, nor was Steve Jobs. They might have been among the richest, but it doesn't make them the most successful. Okay? Each of these is brought to us by the wise and good master 4. Wealth is taken away from those who have used it badly, thus destroying the instrument of, now notice what he's saying here, destroying the instrument of injustice. Wealth is used for unjust reasons, he is suggesting. You need an example? Sheesh. Look at Washington. Look at the corruption that it seems, to my jaded eyes, rampant. I mean, if you're a member of, I just read a little thing about this the other day. I spend a lot of time on the internet, way too much. Member of Congress can generally leave Congress, and it used to be, could get a job as a lobbyist on K Street, the little K Street in D.C. And a member of Congress, that is House of Representatives, used to be able to get a gig for really no less than about $700,000 a year. They make 145, I think, a year as congressman. Member of the Senate could get one for no less than $1 million. And the article I was reading about the other day was about the hard time, poor babies, former members of the House and Senate are having getting plum positions for more than $700,000 or $1 million a year. Okay? He sends, God is God, sends illness to those for whom it is more profitable to have their limbs constrained than to move unhindered toward sinning. It's kind of the, if your left hand offends you, cut it off. Better to enter into heaven without a left hand. Okay. He goes on and talks about famines, floods. Kind of hard to tell the people in the midst of a famine, this is for your own good. Especially if the famine, like in some places in Africa, has been going on for 20 years. Saw another thing the other day. You ought to look for this. It's a TED Talk. Do you guys know what the TED Talks are?
Yeah.
Technology, engineering, design or development, one of the two. And the talk is with this British scientist, and I'm trying to remember his name, Alan. Something like Savory. And the guy's a environmental scientist. He's been one since the 1950s. Okay? And he's been working on desertification around the world. That is, he's been trying to work on eradicating desertification around the world. The process whereby green arable land becomes dead desert. And he talks in this talk, it's about 20 minutes long or so. It's actually part of a much larger one. He talks about, the idea the quote-unquote scientists came up with in the 60s, which was that in Africa, the problem of desertification was thought to be because the herds were too large. They were stamping out the grass, causing the grass to die. Okay, so the soil loses all of its moisture, the grass then completely dies, and gradually, over a period of a decade or two, turns into desert. And so he came up, and he acknowledges in this talk, this was his idea. And he convinced multiple governments in Africa to go along with this. He said part of the problem is the huge number of elephant herds. And he recommended killing 40,000 adult African elephants. If you know, adult African elephants today are on the endangered species list. Okay? And they killed, over a period of like 5 years, 40 or 45,000 adult elephants. Okay? Because it was thought they're killing the ground by there being too many. Well, fast forward to today, and as a result of additional research he has done in South America and the Southwest United States, has come to realize we had it entirely wrong. It has nothing to do with size of grazing herds. In fact, grazing herd animals, huge herds of tens and hundreds of thousands of animals, are actually what keep the ground alive. Because what do? They bend over the grass as they move from location to location. They bend over the grass, the lies on the ground, it retains moisture, the roots stay, the rains come, etc. in the ground. And so he's done test plots of land in like Arizona and New Mexico, areas that I've driven through, which are just hard scrabble land where nothing is, where they've put 100,000 head of cattle on the ground, okay, without feeding them. That is, without dropping in hay. But they get them and then they move them. They move them from one watering hole to another. And what happens? You have 100,000 head of cattle, and that's a lot of manure. And it gets dropped into the ground, okay, and it enters the ecosystem. What's in the manure? Seed. Okay? And within 5 years, I mean, he has a couple of photos on the TED lecture. Within 5 years, you go from essential desert to brushland with grass this tall and trees, as tall as the ceiling. Okay, and he said, and now we started doing it in Africa. And he shows part of, I think, this sub-Sahara desert that's desert. And then 5 years later, it's got trees 50 feet tall. Okay. Because they did go back to putting grazing animals on it, etc. Okay. The point is, we think we can control nature. We think we can kill nature. I don't care what your position is on it. The whole global warming issue. We think that humanity can control the temperature of the earth by our expulsion of carbon dioxide and such. 20 years ago, we thought there was an ice age coming, and there wasn't. Okay? It was getting cooler. The first decade of the 20th century, or the 21st century, was actually cooler than any of the decades of the 20th century. And yet, there's supposed to be this global war, and it stopped. The classical global warming thing is there's this hockey stick, like this, okay? This is the beginning of the rise, which is supposed to have started late 19th century, early 20th century. The only problem is we hit around the year 2000 and it did this. Completely stopped. Didn't go down, just plateaued. Well, you take this and you go back 5,000 years, and what do you see? Okay. And each time you see this rise, kind of interestingly, it appears to correspond with this bright object out in the sky and actions it does, much more than anything we do. Okay? So when he says famines and such, okay, he could be saying, that God's a little bit more involved than all that. Okay, so go on down to number 4. Actually, do I have anything marked here? No, I'll just skip to 5. Oh yeah, this is good. Talking about disorders of cities and nations. We just had, about a week ago, the anniversary of the Japan earthquake. Razings of cities, earthquakes and floods, destructions of armies, shipwreck, every occasion when many people are killed either by earth, by sea, or by air, by fire, or by whatever cause it befalls. These happen in the of the survivors. as collective wickedness is corrected by a public flogging from God. Now, I don't know about you. I can't take that. I have a real problem with that kind of language. When you think of not the Japan earthquake, but the Indonesia earthquake and tsunami that happened in 2005, 2006, 250,000 people in 5 minutes' time. I don't necessarily know that Sumatra is any more sinful than Miami, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Detroit, Nashville, Murfreesboro, my house.
What sort of instances would, like, say, Basil, be referring to in this?
Oh, earthquakes. I mean, earthquakes are fairly common in Cappadocia, or in what is today we would call Eastern Turkey. I mean, Istanbul sits right on a major fault line. It has had numerous major earthquakes over the years. The ancient city of Troy was probably destroyed not by fire and sword, but more by earthquakes than anything else. The Colossus of Rhodes, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, was destroyed by an earthquake. The lighthouse of Pharos off the coast of Alexandria, Egypt, was destroyed by earthquake. I mean, the Middle East has been rent by some major earthquakes. And keep in mind, what do you have on the east side of Africa that pretty much runs not quite north-south, it's like a northeast-south, northwest-southeast, the Great Rift Valley. Well, what's the rift in the Great? It's a fault. Okay, so he would have been pretty familiar with earthquakes and such. Floods, I don't know as much. Razings of cities, yeah, by armies. The Middle East at the time that he's living is not necessarily the safest and most pacified place in on the earth. So he says, so sin is evil in the proper sense, and it is especially worthy of the name of evil. It is brought about by our free choice. Now, that I don't have a problem with. Okay? But to say they had it coming.
Well, the reason I asked that was just because, like, maybe the instances that he was recalling of cities being destroyed, maybe there was more justification in that.
And there could have been. There could have been.
He lived in the Roman Empire. There's it wouldn't be difficult to find reasons why God would want to destroy things that had gotten destroyed at that time.
Well, and keep in mind, he is writing at a time.
I mean, he's also like nowadays we have the internet. We're more aware of like global.
Yeah, I was just trying to see if there was any date given to any of these homilies, and I don't think there are.
Well, I mean, some of them, they were, I believe some of these, the editor, he wasn't even sure that they were written by him at all, so I seriously doubt they'd have a specific date for them.
I mean, we do know his dates, 329 to 79, so
Right.
he lived in the middle of the 4th century. Rome is not as strong as it was. The power has shifted to the east to Constantinople, but it's not going to be much later. Well, he dies in 379, so 21, 10 years, 31 years after he dies, Rome falls by the Huns. I mean, it's sacked. Which you had a lot of people saying at the time, this is because Christians. And St. Augustine writes on the City of God, and he says, no. It's not because of Christians. It's because of Rome's pagan failings, Rome's pagan faults that all this is happening. Which is why he writes the City of God. He says, don't look for permanence here on earth. Look for permanence in the celestial city. And this is, if I could say, I think St. Basil was wrong. There are other church fathers who will not make the same kind of claim that natural catastrophes are God's judgment on people.
Obviously, they can be.
Yeah, they can be. But they wouldn't just say, oh, this is God raining down fire and brimstone upon you for your sinfulness or whatever. Because, in our own lifetimes, we saw not with a natural disaster, a human disaster. We saw that same kind of mentality on 9/11.
Mm.
Jerry Falwell said it was because of the United States' embrace of homosexuality.
Yeah,
Was the reason why, Muhammad Atta and the others flew their planes into the... I don't really think they were thinking about homosexuality when they flew those planes into the buildings. It might have been part of their screwy mindset.
Yeah, you had the Westboro Baptist Church saying, they're always about
They do that, though,
everything bad that happens is because of gays.
And we had some people who picked it up and continued it when Katrina hit.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that happens all. Yeah, that happens.
New Orleans. That was an easy target for that kind of interpretation.
So he goes on. We're going to skip a bunch. Go to the bottom of page 72. He says, therefore, having learned these things clearly from God, you can distinguish for yourself between the kinds of evil and know what's real evil, that is sin, whose end is destruction, and what seems to be evil because it's painful. Which means because it's painful, it's probably God trying to work some good in you. Stop being displeased with divine providence. In short, do not maintain that God is the cause of evil's existence, nor imagine evil to have a subsistence of its own. Because what is evil? Evil is a privation of something. It's absence of good. It's not light. It's the absence of light. Okay? Wickedness does not subsist as if it were a living being. What does wickedness subsist of? Bad choices. That's it. Poor choices. Nor do we hold that its essence exists or coexists in another subsistence. For evil is a privation of good. Now think about this for a minute. Go back to paradise, St. Ephraim's, portrayal. And what do Adam and Eve have? They have everything they could want. Except, with everything they could want, there in the middle of the garden is the tree. And they're told you can eat everything from every tree around it, just don't touch this one. Is that a privation of the good? No. They still have all the good they need. Okay? But instead of choosing the good that has been given to them, with all that there is around them, they choose another good that's not been offered to them. That is, they choose something else that they deem to be good. Okay? Because someone told them, no. That's not what's going to happen. Okay? So he goes on. The eye was created, but blindness comes into being following the destruction of eyes. The eye is good. Sight is good. Blindness is a privation, a removal of the good. Therefore, if the eye did not have a perishable nature, blindness would not have a means to entry. Okay? If the eye could not be corrupted, then it would never go blind. That's understandable. Thus also, evil is not in itself an existence, but arises following the maiming of the good. The tree in the middle of the garden was good. So why wasn't it good when they ate of it? it wasn't intended for them then. In other words, the tree in the garden was like a real simple test. If you know people with young children, you can do this at Christmas. Take a Christmas present, put it out in the middle of a table, and say, that's for you. And if you're good, at some point, I'll let you have that. Or even better than a Christmas present, a cookie or candy, food, kind of a thing. And set it out there. And 9 will get you 10. That kid, at some point, before the appointed time, is going to snatch it. Playing Adam and Eve right there. Okay? Is the gift in and of itself good? Yes. It's all in the taking of it before it was offered. That makes it bad. That makes it evil. Okay? So, he says, skip down to the end of that paragraph, yet indeed evil exists, and its activity shows that it is greatly poured forth in all of life. In other words, we're rampant in our evil. But from what source then does it exist? If it's neither without origin nor created. And how does it exist? If it's without origin, that is, if God didn't say, let there be light, let there be plants, let there be animals, let me make up man, etc. And now let's create evil. He didn't have to do that. Because what was evil? Simply choosing to do other than what God desired. So, he says, okay, if somebody's going to ask me that question, where do illnesses come from? Well, us in our modern 21st century well-educated mindset, they come from bugs and germs and, things like that. Illness is not ungenerated, in other words. God created the body, but he didn't create illness. Likewise, God created the soul, but he didn't create sin. God created the body, but he didn't create cancer. God created the body, but he didn't create muscular dystrophy. Rather, the soul is made evil through a perversion of what is according to nature. And I think to use the two examples I just used, St. Basil would say cancer and muscular dystrophy are a perversion of what is according to nature. After all, what do most cancers do?
They arise from within their actual cells within our body that basically eat.
Okay, well, they don't necessarily
change
eat.
other cells, is what you're saying. They twist them.
They change other cells and they grow uncontrolled.
Right.
That's why you have tumors. It's uncontrolled growth. Okay? In other words, there's something inside, something genetically in the body that develops cancer that a switch flips and it just goes. Okay? We can try to turn the switch off through chemotherapy and such, or just kill it, cut it out, as it were. But there are some cancers, obviously, that can't be treated, just as there are some diseases that can't be treated. So he seems to be saying, whatever the disease is, it's because of some abnormality. Because if you go back to paradise, there's no disease. It's not inherent. So, what was the good set before the soul? Okay, he said, sin is what? The soul is made evil through a perversion of what is according to nature. So, what's the good that was set before the soul? Attentiveness to God in union with him through love. Okay. Attentiveness to God. Putting the attention on God. But what happened? Adam's attention turned to what he had around him. And he saw all the trees he could eat of and thought, there's one more. Why not that one? Having been freed from all necessity, what necessity did Adam have? What did he need? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. In receiving self-determined life from the Creator because it came into being according to the image of God, self-determined, he could choose. Okay? It understands the good and knows his joy and possesses authority and power. Okay? That is, the self-determined soul knows and understands what the good is, and it possesses authority and power, abiding in the contemplation of the beautiful and the enjoyment of spiritual things, guarding carefully in itself the life according to nature. That is, the soul living on the right path. But it also had authority to turn away from the beautiful at any time. And this happened to it when it received a satiety of blessed delights. It received a fullness. It had more than it could want. So it wanted more. You know? Take a child who has 2 toys and take a child who has 200 toys. The child with 200, my experience would be, the child with 200 will want more than the child with 2. The child with 2 will learn to make do with 2 toys. Because those 2 toys can become, through the power of the imagination, 100 different things. Whereas 200 separate toys means you still don't have whatever X, Y, or Z is. This happened to it when it received a satiety of blessed delights and was, as it were, weighed down by a kind of sleepiness and sank down from things above. A kind of sleepiness after this satiety of blessed delights. We almost have a description there of an American national holiday. Thanksgiving. What do you have on Thanksgiving? The table is spread out. And then what do people often do? They sleep it off. Especially if they eat a lot of turkey when the tryptophan inside the turkey. Okay? It's a chemical in the turkey, makes you sleepy.
Actually, I think they disproved that.
No, it's true.
No.
Sank down from things above, being mixed with the flesh through the disgraceful enjoyment of pleasures. The soul gets filled with pleasures. It gets lazy and fat. So, he says, there was a time when Adam was set on high, not in place, but by free choice. When having just then been given life, he looked up toward heaven and became exceedingly glad at what he saw. He greatly loved his benefactor, who gave him the enjoyment of eternal life, enabled him to rest amid the delights of paradise, gave him authority like that of the angels. I mean, think of the authority Adam had. He got to name the animals, if you accept the biblical story. Made his way of life the same as that of the archangels, and let him hear the divine voice. What does that mean? Made his way of life the same as that of the archangels. Well, where are the archangels? Perpetually in the presence of God. That's what he means. Adam was perpetually in the presence of God. That's what it means when it says, and God walked with Adam in the cool of the day. Okay? He was communing with Adam. He became quickly full of everything. And becoming instant through satiety, he preferred what appeared delightful to the fleshly eyes to the spiritual beauty. That is, he preferred what appeared to be delightful to his eyes over the spiritual beauty, and considered the filling of the stomach more valuable than spiritual enjoyments. And immediately he was outside paradise. In other words, it's almost like he didn't even really need to take the bite. As soon as the one replaced the other, whoosh, outside. Okay? Done as a mere test. God knew what he would do. The test was for Adam to learn. Okay? So, to the extent that he withdrew from life, meaning to the extent that Adam withdrew from God, what happened? He drew near to death. Because if you move away from God, what are you moving to? not God. If God is life, then you're moving towards the source of death. For God is life, and privation of life is death. So, he asks next paragraph, why did we not have sinlessness in our structure? Why didn't God make it so Adam couldn't sin? Because then he wouldn't have been made in the image of God. If he'd made it so Adam couldn't sin, then what would Adam be? Adam would be like my dog, or dogs. Adam would be like, a lion. Do lions sin? No. When a lion kills something and eats something, he does what lions do. Or she does what lions do. Okay? It's not that they sit there, and their little pack of lions sit there and they start planning. They see some person off on safari walking and go, oh, look at that. There's a human. Let's get him. Start with the feet and chew from there up. They're not evil like that. What do they see? Dinner. It might be a human. It might be a hyena. It's meat. Chow down. Okay? We are the only ones who plan. I mean, really plan our murders and our wars and such. God does not love what is constrained, but what is accomplished out of virtue. Virtue comes into being out of free choice, not out of constraint. Free choice depends on what is up to us, and what is up to us is self-determined. That's why, Congress can make as many laws as it wants. Laws will never make a person good. Period. Even though they attempt, even though you hear, group on one side or the other say, oh, we shouldn't be legislating morality. It's what every law does. Every law is an attempt to legislate morality. But every law that's passed does not change people. Okay? How many of you sped today? Got in your car and drove. Or will speed today? See? That law is not, quote unquote, written on your heart. It doesn't form an integral part of you. Or, frankly, many other laws. Okay? No.
That's the rule, civil disobedience. He says that explicitly. I'm probably getting this wrong, but no law has ever made man one whit better, I think is how he phrased it.
And wasn't it, who was it? Madison who said, if men were angels, we'd need no government? It's precisely because we're not angels, okay? But we have that possibility of self-determination, okay? That's what virtue is. That's why Adam had to have the test. If there was no test, God, it's as it were, God would never know. Is Adam doing this because he wants to or because he doesn't have a choice? So a choice has got to be entered. If a child never has a choice, the child will never grow to be virtuous. Never. There will be no virtue. Virtue used to be the whole point, by the way, of this place, not MTSU, the idea of the university. Okay? The idea of education used to be growth into virtuous behavior, virtuous life. And I don't mean virtuous, the Christian virtues. I mean the good life, justice, peace, beauty, honesty, loyalty, truth. Those old classical kind of virtues, right? So he goes, okay, now that we've done that, what about the devil? Where's the devil come from if not God? Didn't God make him? Well, of course he did. But for what reason then is the human being evil? Because of his freedom of choice. Well, what reason is the devil evil? Because he chose what? Because the devil possesses a life endowed with self-determination, and the authority rests either to remain with God or to become estranged from the good. And what does the book of Revelation say? If you take that literally, any of it literally, what happened when Satan fell? 1/3 of the angels fell with him. That is, 1/3 chose to yoke their wagon to him rather than to God.
Well, the dragon swung its tail and knocked 1/3 of the stars out of heaven.
Yeah, something like that.
that.
Gabriel is an angel, he stood by God continually. Michael is an angel, stood by God continually. Satan is an angel, and he fell away. Does he lose his angelic being? No. Still has all of that. The free choice of the one kept him in things above, the determination of the other down. That's why the opposite of Satan is not God. The opposite of Satan is Michael. Michael is the captain of the heavenly host. Satan is the captain of the infernal host. Okay? For the one, Gabriel, could have become an enemy, and the other need not have fallen. Okay? But the one was preserved by his insatiable love of God, while his withdrawal from God showed the other as worthless. Evil consists in estrangement from God. That's it. That's all evil is. Any estrangement from God. So with a small turning of the eye, think about this for a moment. We're either facing the sun or facing the shadow of our own body. Notice evil doesn't have to be this great, taking up Satanism and swearing up and down, inverted cross, sacrificing babies. What can it be? Simply a turning to self and away from God. Well, how does one turn away from God? Look at the parable of the Good Samaritan. By turning away from someone else in need. So, misusing the desires, next paragraph, he had for likeness to God to deceive him. That is, Satan misused the desire that Adam had for the likeness to God. Made in the image and likeness of God. Okay. He used that desire to deceive him. He showed him the tree and said, "Eat that and you'll be like God." What did God say? "Don't eat this and you'll be like me." Don't eat this. You can eat everything else around it, but don't eat this. And it's in the obeying of the commandment that he would then become more like God. Satan turned that around and said, no. Eat it. Then you'll be like God. Why? Because you'll know good from evil. Would Adam have learned good from evil without eating the tree? Yes. Yes. Because he would have grown into the likeness of God. How? By action. By virtuous action. By choosing one over the other. Okay? So he goes on in section 9. Yeah.
Sorry, there's something a note I made is when it says, foreseeing himself thrown down from among the angels, he could not bear to see the earthly one lifted through progress to the rank of the angels. I thought that was interesting because it reminded me of the Screw Tape letters. Because there's, I think
Oh,
there's,
yeah.
I think it's been a while since I read it, but I think there's like a whole letter just on this where, Screw Tape talks about just the insult of creating an animal.
God loves the little vermin, as he calls us, that are really amphibians. Because we take both matter and spirit. We don't belong solely here, and we don't belong solely there. We're a conglomeration of the two. But Lewis says, what's really disgusting is that he truly loves the little vermin. And what does he mean by that? He wants the little vermin to enter into him and to become fully part of him. Not to be swallowed up like our infernal father below once. Okay? There it's all about consumption. Okay? He says, but to become fully part of him and yet to remain distinct. To become who they were meant to be. Yeah, it's a beautiful passage. Page 77. He's talking about the bad companions ruin good morals. Similarly, the habitual association with petty, worthless things lets great evils drop into the soul, even if the harm escapes immediate perception. What does he mean? Habitual association with petty, worthless things.
Material possession.
Material possessions, little small sins. The proverbial white lie. Okay? He says what? Habitual association does what? Dulls us to them. So that little lies eventually become unimportant. So that slightly larger lies develop and they become unimportant. So that pretty soon you're lying day in, day out. And it seems unimportant. To where you finally get to the point where you can't tell fact from fiction. Okay? That's what he means. Or other little sins. Drink. And I'm not saying drinking's bad. I brew beer at home. But he's talking about moving from a glass of beer or a bottle of beer to a six-pack of beer, to a keg of beer, to a barrel of beer. You have a progression there. Okay? The little things lead to larger things. It's the idea that Rudy Giuliani put to place when he became mayor of New York. This idea that broken windows, it started off as a sociological theory of crime, that broken windows in buildings lead to bigger crimes. If you let kids get away with breaking a window in an abandoned building, they will progress from that crime to larger crimes. And so one of the things Giuliani did was he put more cops on the street to try and stop petty crimes. Because you stop petty crimes, you stop larger crimes from happening. And within a period of like 4 years, you went from New York being a place that people were afraid to travel to and afraid to travel in. When I first went to New York, I would not step on a subway. No way in God's green earth you're getting me gone to the ground with 8 million, murdering thieves and rapists was kind of my mentality. This was right after Bernie Goetz, shot 6 people because they jumped him. Okay, personally, he had a reason to. 2, getting around to where you could walk up and down, Times Square in New York and not be accosted by a panhandler or a pimp or a prostitute. Okay? Whereas in the 1980s, you couldn't do that. Okay? So somebody's going to ask, what reason was the tree in paradise? Why did it need to be there? Because there needed to be a commandment to test our obedience. Notice, no beating around the bush here. For this reason, there is a tree abundantly bearing ripe fruit, that in abstaining from the pleasure, as we manifested the goodness of self-restraint, we might justly be worthy of the crowns of perseverance. In Galatians, where it lists the fruits of the Spirit, where's self-control? It's the last one. Is that because it's the highest? Love is the first one. Is it the highest or is it the lowest?
It's the foundation from which you would be able to
Okay.
attain these other virtues, really. 'Cause
You could say it's the foundation. Some say it's the highest. That it takes love of others to finally learn self-control. I think you're probably right, Gregory, that it is, you got to learn self-control to go on to humility and patience and faithfulness and gentleness, all these others. Okay? It was necessary that they not know their nakedness, that is, Adam and Eve not know their nakedness, that the mind of the human being might not turn toward the fulfillment of lesser needs, sexual desires. St. Ephraim thought that Adam and Eve in paradise wouldn't have even thought about sex, and that the goal of marriage is not sex, that the goal of marriage is that the two grow more and more and more alike, okay, and thus become kind of an image of the Trinity. Skip over to the next page. I'm trying to get through this one as quickly as possible. There's not much I want to say about anger, and there's very little I want to say about be attentive to yourself.
See, this is a recurring theme throughout through a lot of these,
Course.
writings. Well, is this idea that is this conception of paradise that if it hadn't been for all, Adam and Eve would have been the only people. You know how they would have thought of it, but
Right.
like it's just, but that's the consequence of this conception of paradise. You know.
Well, no, it's a consequence to a certain point. Because I think even, I don't know that St. Ephrem would say this, but I think St. Basil and some of the other fathers would say no, that there still would have been sexual relations after Adam and Eve had grown. In other words, because it was still the goal of God to fill the earth with humanity. Okay? And that could only occur one of two ways. Either Adam and Eve got busy, or God got busy, making, separate little Adam and Eves all over the place. Be a lot easier to just let us do it, I guess. So he goes on page 78. Well, it's the bottom of 77. He goes on and talks about, why clothes hadn't yet been invented. Okay? He says they weren't fitting either by nature or art. Well, Adam and Eve didn't need clothes. All right?
This is 78.
This is bottom of 77. On the one hand, they belong by nature to the non-rational animals, such as feathers, hair, thick skins, etc. Okay? But it was fitting for the human being, according to the intensity of his love for God, to be given instead things surpassing these good things. What were Adam and Eve going to receive? Robes of glory. Okay? Ephrem talks about. But the things invented through devotion to art promote business, which is especially to be avoided as harmful to the human being. Okay? He's an anti-capitalist. He's not a communist. He's an anti-capitalist.
Outside of it altogether.
He sees.
He is a monastic.
In a sense, the idea of monastic, the way he wants to see societies run the way monasteries were run. Basically.
Everything held in common.
Yeah.
Okay? But other clothes had been prepared had he shown virtue. Those coming by the gift of God to blossom for the human being, certain shining garments, etc. I thought I had on the syllabus, which is why I was checking before class. But I thought I had on the syllabus a link to a work I wanted you guys to read, but I don't know where to fit it in at this point, called The King of Crete. And it's this big, long series of penitential hymns, right? It is sung, we started it last night. It is sung every year in the Orthodox Church during the first week of Great Lent. Each night on the first week, you sing a different part. It's very long, okay? All about is losing, okay, the glory that Adam had in paradise. It is essentially a soul singing to God. It's a soul lamenting to God what the soul has lost. And the soul says things, I've lost my first clothes, I've lost my first fruits, I've lost everything. It's much more poetic than that, all right? And St. Andrew was a writer who wrote a huge number of hymns, and the canon was actually approved at the Sixth Ecumenical Council as something to be sung. This is really the only thing like this that happens in the councils, as something to be sung the first week in Lent from that point on. So in 680, it was decided this is going to be sung, and it's been sung in every Orthodox church and every first week of Great Lent since then. But it has an awful lot to bear with what St. Basil is saying here, in terms of the clothes putting back on. Because what the soul comes to do is it wants to get back to paradise, okay, and putting on of those clothes. So, he says, the garments we would have put on would have exceeded the varieties of flowers and the radiance and brilliance of the stars. Skip down to the next paragraph, second sentence. The Lord has planned for us wrestling with him so that we would wrestle through obedience and triumph over the adversary. That is, the Lord planned for us to wrestle with the devil and overcome. What do? Uncle. We gave. So who then was the devil? What was his rank? Next paragraph. What was his dignity? Why, in short, has he been named Satan? Because he's the adversary. That's what Satan means. Okay? Go to section 10. Trying to wrap this up. Talking about the devil's army and such. And then mentions Christ saying, I saw Satan falling as lightning from heaven. Luke 10:18. For he, that is Christ, has given power to his own disciples to trample on serpents and scorpions and on all the power of the enemy. It doesn't mean we should go out becoming snake handlers.
No, this Luke 10:18. I should have looked this up. I was planning on two, but I'm trying to remember. Isn't that the passage where it's a little bit ambiguous, whether it's saying where it's talking about? I think it's like light. It's one of the places where it's like it doesn't actually say Satan. It says something. You know what? I have nothing substantive to say about this. It's just it was something else.
No, I think it actually does say Satan.
Okay.
I think it might be Christ quoting from the Old Testament. However, I'm trying to remember where. Ezekiel, Daniel? Not Ezekiel, Daniel.
I'm trying to remember if this is one of the uses of the word Lucifer, which, you know.
Hold on. Handy dandy Bible app. I've got to use this for a thing I'm working on, if I can find it. Come on. Ignore. What book did we say? Luke? 10:18. The 70 returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. And there is a note. 10. Describes an event that takes place 5 times Satan set his will against God. Isaiah 14:12 through 15. Nothing else about it. Let me just real quickly. Oops. What did I say? Isaiah 14:12 through 15. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, who rose up in the morning? He who sins for all the nations is crushed to the earth. For you said in your mind, I will ascend into heaven. I will place my throne above the stars of heaven. I will sit on a lofty mountain, on the lofty mountains towards the north. I will ascend above the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Okay, that's... Who is that speaking? God through Isaiah, quoting Satan? Something like that.
Because I know that I've read stuff about this where like there's some scholars who would say that Lucifer is actually referring to just a human like king or lord or something like that, which and because there's points through in that area where it references Lucifer where it says you believe you are like God, but no, you're a man. So obviously Satan isn't a man, or something like that.
Well, I've never come across anything like that. Lucifer the line there in Isaiah 14:12, O Lucifer who rose up in the morning. Lucifer is also sometimes called son of the morning star.
Right.
Christ is the morning star. Okay. What does Lucifer mean? The very name.
Like
It's a
light-
great name.
It's like light bringer.
Yeah, bearer of light. It's a fantastic name. But most people aren't going to use it today because it'd be like naming your kid Adolf.
Yes.
It's got certain connotations that are, just kind of hard to get away. I had a neighbor, completely off the point. I had a neighbor several years ago who every Halloween would dress like Alice Cooper and looked exactly like him. I mean, when he would come out for a conference. And he'd come out with his boa, which was about 8 feet long, named Lucifer. Okay, so you have Alice Cooper, Satan, as it were, and his boa. Really gave the kids a thrill to see that.
That's kind of funny because Alice Cooper, I think at one point, actually was converted to Christianity.
His father's minister.
Oh, yeah, it's
My priest went to school with him.
show business.
So I mean, like right now, like he eventually.
Yeah, he did. He came back. Yeah, he's yeah. It was all an
Oh
act.
yeah, well being
It wasn't like Ozzy Osbourne biting off bats' heads on the stage and stuff. So he goes on and says, therefore, since his wicked tyranny is overthrown, that is because he's fallen from heaven, and because Christ gave the power to his disciples to trample down demons, since his tyranny is overthrown and the region surrounding the earth is cleansed through the passion of the Savior, that is the region surrounding the earth, the air. He was lifted up into the air. The prince of the power of the air is overthrown, who makes peace between things on earth and things in the heavens. Henceforth, the kingdom of heaven is proclaimed to us. That's why Satan doesn't have any power anymore. So when Satan does have power, it's because it's given to him. That's the whole point. All right? So he finishes this homily with these sentences. We will have an uninterrupted existence without pain and enjoy the tree of life, from which we were prevented from partaking since the beginning through the plot of the serpent. For God appointed the flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life, passing it unhindered, that is, passing this flaming sword. Why? Think of the language that Ephraim used. That sword that pierced Christ's side has now opened the gates of paradise. Now may we enter into the enjoyment of good things in Christ Jesus our Lord, to whom be glory and dominion, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Pardon? Sorry, it doesn't. What does he say? Rather than go through this homily kind of paragraph by paragraph in the 7 minutes we have, what does he say about anger?
I thought this was very interesting. That because, especially considering his references to like man's dominion over beasts, is this idea that when you succumb to anger, you basically become an animal. You're no longer what God intended you to be. You're no longer a human being. You're just like the other animals. And there's multiple references to that throughout this particular homily. And I just thought it was really interesting because it calls back to his talk about the origin of humanity and how and what makes humanity, above animals is their capacity to reason.
Yep.
And the way he looks at it, anger, when you allow it to overcome your reason.
Well,
you're no
think-
longer truly human.
Don't let it overcome, but don't try to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of says use it as a motivator, but don't be consumed within it. But don't try and avoid it because you're going to need it to.
There can be righteous anger.
Yeah, righteous anger, I guess.
It's the ultimate overarching idea within Christianity that there is nothing that is within us inherently that is actually in and of itself evil. The problem is when it is either used in excess or used towards an evil end.
Right.
It's not anger, we'll just go through all the different passions. Those things are all there for a reason.
Passions aren't inherently evil. It is how they are directed or how they are uncontrolled. Yeah, exactly. I mean, when he says, whenever, page 83, whenever anger becomes implacable, that is, it cannot be placated, like a flame with abundant fuel and holds tight to provocations, then indeed the spectacle is indescribable and unbearable to behold. Now, maybe you've never seen this, maybe you've never experienced this, but I've seen and experienced both. That is, I've been that flame that, you say one thing to and it's just heaping gasoline on the fire. And sometimes you'll be around people who want to heap gasoline on the fire because they want to see someone totally lose control. You see it sometimes, you read about it sometimes, when you hear there's a fight somewhere and other people come in and egg on the fight, or somebody standing at a window contemplating suicide and people are down there yelling, "Jump! Jump!" Okay? What does anger do? It kills reason. It kills reason because anger isn't rational. None of the passions are rational. Love doesn't make sense. When and if you fall in love with someone, you won't be able to say, "Oh, well, I love you because X, Y, and Z." You pull out, a steno pad and you start doing pros and cons. Doesn't work that way. It's like, I don't know, because you're you, and because you're not somebody else, as it were. All right. Look at what he says about dealing with anger. Page 84. Do not cure the evil with evil, nor attempt to outdo each other in such matters. What good does it do to reply to somebody who's angry at you in anger? You might as well be, playing with flamethrowers at each other. Because you throw your anger on them and they're just going to ramp that sucker up back and forth. Has someone insulted you in anger? Stop the evil how? By silence. Silence. Don't respond. You really want to get somebody angry? Don't respond. Drives people up the wall. If they are really angry at you and they are harping and arguing, etc., if you literally say nothing and turn and walk away. I mean, yeah, there are some crazies who are going to pull a gun and shoot you. Okay? Unfortunately, that's going to happen. Okay? Not with your friends, however. Your friends are maybe some might. Your friends are going to get very angry, but they'll often, after a while, calm down. Okay? But if you keep going at it, there's no end in sight. It's just like a warring feud. Okay? From the very beginning, let us stop the evil, removing the anger from our souls by every contrivance. This is the next paragraph. Has someone abused you? Bless him. And he means that, literally. Offer a blessing on that person. Pray for that person. Has he struck you? Endure it. That's what Christ means when he says, turn the other cheek. Does he spit on you and regard you as nothing? Then accept this thought about yourself. Okay. The Eastern Church has a huge, long history of saying, dead men cannot be offended. So, when someone offends you, respond like a dead man. Dead men can't be offended. In other words, if someone calls you a good-for-nothing, worthless SOB, say, yeah, you're probably right. Accept it. What does Polonius tell Hamlet? Accept every man's censure, but give no man your tongue. It's the exact same thing.
Then again, Polonius. Not
Yeah,
very
if
good.
Polonius,
Not very good
if
accepting
Polonius would
God's
only
word.
listen to his own words. That's the problem within that play. Polonius gives great advice, but he's a hypocrite. St. Basil's not a hypocrite. Okay? This is a guy who did what he said. And you see that, we won't talk about it, but you see that with the rules. Okay? And how the monasticism and the monastic orders, not orders per se, but the style of monasticism that he encouraged. Okay? We'll talk about that a little bit on Thursday when we get into on social justice.